Hi there, I'm Kirsten Dean and today I'm sitting with Prof Heidi van Rooyen. We are going to be talking about the amazing work she has done here at the HSRC and her love for poetry. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you, Kirsten.
So you brought poetry into the HSRC. What was the initial reaction that people had towards that and how has it changed?
Well, one of the beauties about the HSRC is that it's big and you can get away with a lot of things. So that was really interesting. So I discovered this method called Poetic inquiry and I started to bring it into the program that I was leading at the time. So I think there was like a little sense of like people were a little like, what's this about? There's a little weird poetry in the HSRC. A little skeptical, unsure. I started to then do two things. One was decided to talk about it much more. So at an HSRC seminar conference, I presented on it. And then in the program I was leading at the time, we decided to, with Rafael actually, run a series of workshops to train people in the method. And I think that helped to kind of shift some of that, what's this about, how could we do it, kind of feeling that was there. And also to culminate, we had like a graduation process for those who'd participated in this Poetic Inquiry workshop. And we had a really wonderful session in the HSRC Pretoria office in the old library. And we called it a library session. And so people performed their poems that they developed in the workshop. And we also discovered that there are other people in the HSRC that do poetry, like Pomolo from finance. Is actually a fairly well-established poet.
Check. Here we go. This woman is an intellect, music of the most high. Reached to you with interest, hoping I could hold time. Love is the drum on which my heartbeat looks to rest. Time flies, so do I. Let's land in Budapest. Architecture they nest on my chest, just in case you desire rest. Promise, provide. We wrote a new chapter. I stabbed her with jokes. She bled, laughter. I stitched.
So him and his band did the opening for that library session, and we all celebrated by performing our poems. It was really lovely. So I think it shifted. I think that same way in which it kind of resonated for me and felt like it allowed me a different way to think about poetry and to think about research. I think once people got to hear about it, some of that kind of misgiving or sense of what's this about and what does it have to do with research started to shift.
And I'd really love to know, how did you come to be a poet and what does poetry mean to you as a person?
So I have to confess, I hated poetry at school. I think like many of us, we suffered under the way in which poetry was taught. So poetry was taught as like a cognitive discipline. There was a right answer. You had to kind of get it by kind of getting the interpretation of the poem right. And that completely put me off. Also, it was like the poems we read and were taught at school were from lots of old white men, which had no appeal to me. I couldn't see myself in those words, in those poems. So I really actually didn't like poetry at all. I would never have considered myself as a poet at all. Not a word I would have associated with myself. And it must have been about, I think more than 10, 12 years ago that I got a fellowship to go and work in the US for a short period of time. And while I was there in the university, I saw this notice on the notice board that said, poetry course in Glendale. I was like, poetry course? Well, I got time. Maybe I should go. And so I did. So that's how it started. I started writing poetry in that way. I started writing for people in my life. My partner at the time, I wrote a poem for her. But still with the sense of, this is not my thing. This is not really for me. I was dabbling in it, but very, very skeptically, just quietly working in it. I think until I got to then discover Poetic Inquiry and this use of poetry in research, that kind of really just took things to the next level for me.
So can you tell us a bit more about Poetic Inquiry? What is it? What can it be used for?
Yeah, so Poetic Inquiry is one of those kind of arts-based methodologies in qualitative research that really have at their core an attempt at trying to make, I think, qualitative research more accessible, trying to kind of find different ways or different formats in which we can be doing research, that are not just kind of text-based, that are not just in that traditional way of interviewing, focus group discussions and so on. It really tries to do something else with qualitative research and tries to reach a broader audience. And so within that broader umbrella sits poetry and this idea that you can use poetry as a way to do those very things, a way to inquire into a particular topic. So for me, a lot of my work's been around race and identity and coloredness. And so when I started, perhaps the easiest way was to try and then look at all the literature in South Africa on coloredness and race and identity, and then try and see what emerged from that literature, what were the themes, and then to write found poems on that literature. So essentially, you stay with the literature, but you kind of use texts and words from that literature to create these found poems. So that's how I started, was using found poems from the literature. So that's one way in which you can use poetic inquiry, to kind of read around a particular topic and write some poems from that. You can also use it in other ways to inquire. So for example, I ended up with focus group discussion data on a whole, from a study we were doing on HIV actually, with trans women in Namibia and South Africa, and ended up with this focus group data. And sometimes you do, as a qualitative researcher, you kind of end up with data and go like, oh, there's nothing there, I can't really see it. And now I was starting to kind of dabble with poetry, and I was like, well, maybe I should take this focus group data and see if I can turn this into poems. So I went through the data. I looked at what the themes were, and they were around relationship, they were around identity, they were around transness. And again, using those participants' words, so not my own, using participants' words, I created these found poems on what it felt like for this group of trans women, what the experience of being trans was like. So there are many ways you can use it. It's a qualitative methodology. It's using poetry to kind of, as a method to explore, to inquire, to dig into particular issues. It's using poetry as a way of presenting your results or presenting your findings. And I think it works in a really incredible way, because what it does is, through the poems, you take this data, which sometimes just sits in research articles, but this data can become much more accessible, much more visible to wider audiences, which I think is what we should be doing more of in research, making our research more accessible and more visible. So, yeah.
So I would love it if you would read us one of your poems that you created using poetic inquiry.
Sure. I'm going to read this one that I wrote from the focus group discussions on trans women. So I'll talk a bit about how I did it. So I went through the data. I created these poems. I think there were 10. Now, you, a poet, you know, sometimes this was my first real substantial, I would say, poetry output, even though they weren't all my words, and I was staying as much as possible with the trans women's words and capturing their experience. It was the first time it kind of felt like, oh my God, these poems like arrived. I hadn't really done anything like significant like this, but it really felt, and there's something about poetry, it feels like you're in that moment and you are kind of a conduit for these words to come out. So that's what it felt like. These 10 poems emerged. I wrote them up. I sent them back to the trans women. So this was really nice, this kind of co-creation process. And I said, well, have a look. What do you think? And it was really interesting for them, the sense of, oh my word, it's the first time I participate in a lot of research, but it's the first time that I have a sense of my experience being made visible. I have a sense of, wow, somebody really gets what it's like through these poems, what it's like to be trans and the issues and challenges we face. And so they then tweaked some of the poems. They said, maybe not this, maybe this. I kind of changed some of the words, but there was a general sense of like resonance, that the poems had captured their lived experiences. So I'll read one. This one is called Nobody is Safe. You find these boys, they target you. Alone in a group, they pick you out. Nobody is safe, especially trans women. They wait for you, you walk home, they rob you. If you don't have anything, they hit you, humiliate you. When they rob cis women, they don't rape her or sexually assault her. They always rape trans women. They think you were born a man but behave like a woman today. They'll show you. Social spaces aren't safe. Out having your fun, drinking your beer. a dude just comes and kicks you for no reason. You did nothing. You fall to the ground. Nobody will help you. The crowd mocks, adds fuel to the fire, stands and stares till the guy is done. The crowd mocks, adds fuel to the fire, stands and stares till the guy is done.
I am wondering what the experience was like for you hearing about these things that these trans women were going through, and how did that make you feel? Because it's quite an intense thing to do. So what was that like for you?
You know, that experience with these trans women and writing these poems, as I said, started me out on this journey of using poetic inquiry and using poetry in research. But I think it completely transformed me as a researcher. So there's something about, I've been doing research for a long time, 20 years in the HSRC now. A long time I've been doing research. And after a while, I think we almost become a bit dead to the things we are writing about. There's a way in which qualitative research, and this is how poetic inquiry kind of, in a way, was started, and these other arts-based approaches. There's a way in which qualitative research was almost quite quantitative. You know, there was a formulaic way in which you would kind of take focus group data, you'd clip a bit of text, you'd put that text in as the lived reality of person A, B, or C, and D. But in many ways, it was becoming overly mechanical. And I think in the way in which qualitative research was happening, it was losing the very voice, the very essence of those people that you're talking about. And I think for me, after doing this for like some couple of decades, I think I was kind of a bit far removed from a lot of the realities, and a lot of my work is around gender, around race, around HIV. Maybe it's a protective thing, but I was far removed. And so there was something about writing the poems, and there's something about poetic inquiry that I think transforms not just the knowledge that you put in out, but also transforms you as a researcher. Because there was a way in which I couldn't just hide behind the words. When you read a poem like that, it's like, whew, this is real stuff. It's not clipped neatly into boxes of text. There's a way in which the poems jump out at you, the way in which the poems force you to be different, to feel different, and I think force some kind of action, a desire to do better, to do more work, to do better research, a desire to make visible these marginalized and lost voices and make their realities more explicit and make them more heard. So I think it definitely transformed me. It made me feel more connected, certainly made me feel more alive. And I think, I can, from that time, I feel like I can't just call myself a researcher. I feel like the word poet researcher is better, or research poet is better. Because there's a way in which my eyes are open, there's a way in which I see the world that is poetic, but is shaped in this broader context of research. And I'm grateful for that. I'll never go back to being that researcher with the dead eyes. I feel like I will always be alive and engaged and transformed in the work that I do.
I love it so much. And you touched briefly about how the participants felt after, you had worked on these poems. And I'm just wondering, how did they view the experience after reading the work?
So I think they were really touched. I think there's something about poetic inquiry that transforms the knowledge, but also the participants as well as you as a researcher. So they, in their feedback, so what we did was we sent the poems back to them. We said, here are the poems, what do you think? How would you tweak, change it? And then we had a discussion about what was this like for you and how did you feel? And so to a person, they really felt very, I think, seen and heard. And I think if you're a marginalized group, whether you're marginalized by disability, by race, by whatever, sexual orientation, to feel as though your story, your particular perspective is seen and has space, there was a sense in which they felt very validated, very much seen and heard. They felt that the poems were powerful and that the poems could be quite a wonderful way to disseminate knowledge, to make this reality of theirs more visible to wider audiences. So they had ideas of, we should put the poems up in all clinics where there are young trans people sitting there wondering about their journey and their experience, and they can see our poems and they can know that they're not alone. So they felt really, I think that the poems were really powerful. They felt very moved, and I think the overwhelming sense was that these poems have real power to transform, to change themselves, the world, make a difference in the lives of other young trans people, who came across them and heard them or witnessed them.
And touching on that, you mentioned that poetic inquiry has opened your eyes and you look at research differently. So I want to know a bit more about how it has shaped you as an individual and not just as a researcher, but how you experience the world around you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of feel like I'm forever changed, I'm forever different. Like my own poetry has like just grown. There's a way in which I suppose I'm always thinking poetically and I didn't realize it. I'm always listening. There's a way in which I'm constantly processing my own experience through poems. So it's given me this really wonderful tool, a really wonderful way of making sense of my life, a wonderful way of documenting, of processing, of working through things. And I'm really grateful. So I feel like I'm most definitely a better human being for poetry. I feel like I'm more alive, more in touch with myself and the world through the poetry, because it forces a way of listening to things around you with an open heart, open ears, open mind, kind of ready to kind of capture or process or make sense or write something in a way of your experience of something that can help somebody else make sense, resonate, land, etc. So I feel like it's completely transformed my life. One of the funniest things, jokes that I have is about this being forever changed is this job, that new job that I have. I had to do this big pitch for the job, like your vision for this new department. And I was like, well, I'm not just a researcher. I have a research vision, but I'm a poet researcher. So I'm going to pitch up for this big interview, and I'm going to do my vision as a poetic inquiry. So I delivered it as poems and visuals.
Wow.
And it's that sense of they're going to get it, or they're going to get me, or they're not. But I'm not that researcher of 15 years ago. I'm not just a researcher. I'm a poet researcher. And so I'm looking all the time at the world, at all these issues around us in very, very different eyes, with poet eyes. And so they like that or they don't, but this is who I am. Yeah.
I love that. And I think that now is the perfect opportunity for us to hear one of your poems that is not based on somebody else's experience, but your words.
Sure. Thank you. So this little one I wrote is kind of, probably some of that beginning part has to do with some of this reading and literature I did on Wentworth, which is the place, this kind of township I grew up in. But it certainly is a poem that I've generated that combines some of that with my own experience and my own family. So I call this Last Stop. The old white stork, nearing retirement, feeling the weight of one too many deliveries in this old makeshift village, circles it one last time, her final offering safe in her trusty pink pouch. She zigzags across the four corners of a 3.2-kilometer patchwork of mean corrugated iron shanties, swampy informal settlement, rows of long squat houses like chicken coops, children, dogs, families pouring out its edges. A red brick 6x3, 2-bedroom semi-detached house, red bougainvillea tree bursting out of front yard, catches her eye. She flies in low and steady, drops a parcel, turns quickly, her afternoon tea and snack wetting her lips. The soft thud at the wooden door causes Mom to shuffle over. Opens it a crack, sees that white face, those bright eyes, and feels a warmth settle across her chest. Shirtless Dad in his old grey shorts wanders over at the fuss. Itinerant bedboy, the world's worst rent collector, expert consumer of unrefined alcohol, leans over, finds a breath he didn't know he'd lost. The noisy clutch of siblings jostle to the door, take a look at that red, puckered up face and questioning eyes, immediately shut the door. They wonder, where will she sleep? What will she wear? Whose food will she eat?
Thank you, Prof. That poem, it has a way of making you feel as if that was your own life. the way you wrote it. And you mentioned that it was written about where you grew up. And I just want to know, what inspired you to write about that now at your age?
Yeah, because I am very old. You know, us old people. But there is something about age. There is something about, I think, getting older and in a way looking back or wanting to make sense of some of that time. So I think in many ways it was poetic inquiry that brought me into this space of wanting to know a bit more and wanting to write more about those early beginnings for me in Wentworth and my family and what it was like. And it was through poetic inquiry starting to really just grapple with what does it mean for me now? Particularly what does it mean for me now in this, and for us now, in this space of 30 years of democracy. Some people say there's no place for us to be talking about these issues of coloredness. It's like such an old concept and idea. It was kind of fabricated by the apartheid government. Like, who really cares? But there was something about, I think, my life, about many people, however they identify in this broader band of coloredness. There was something about those stories that I think that were not told, that were not visible, that there was this really important group in this country that felt quite marginalized, I think. And like what a lot of my work, there was a desire to kind of make my story known, to make the stories of people like me known, because I think it's part of our collective history in this country. So, yeah, that's what prompted it.
There are a lot of descriptions and imagery in the poem, which is one of my favorite methods to use. And I was just wondering, what do you think the power is in using that in poetry?
Yeah. So when I first started, I don't think I wrote like that. When I first started, I would use these kind of, some ways these big clunky words or kind of terms or psychological terms. And one of the things I learned, and I attended lots of things, different workshops, retreats. I read a lot of other poets' work, etc. And one of the things that I realized was powerful was the power of description, was the power of an image. That you don't have to always say an emotion like angry, but you can describe it through imagery. And that allows, imagery allows people in to a particular moment and allows them to put their own imprint or their own experience on it. Sometimes we're quick to go to certain words and we want to describe something, and it maybe forces people in a different way to kind of engage with. So I think that imagery, description, opens it up. I think makes it more powerful, makes it more resonant. It allows the words to kind of land, I think, in the body, not in the head, in the body. So you describe something, use an image, use a metaphor. There's a way in which it just goes in the body. And I think that's good poetry. For me, that's good poetry.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I want to know, what is your vision for poetry in the research space? And also, what advice would you give anyone at the HSRC that's wanting to implement more of poetic inquiry here?
So we've written these 2 books. Da-da-da-da! Book 2. Da-da-da-da! Book 1, Kirsten's got, this is book 2. These are 2 books on poetic inquiry that have emerged from us in this broader consortium who are concerned about how do we advance poetic inquiry, particularly in the global south. And I think that's my wish for the HSRC, is to continue to drive the use of this methodology. There's a lot of talk about decoloniality, decolonizing knowledge, decolonizing traditions, decolonizing all kinds of things. And I think poetic inquiry is a really powerful way of upending the typical ways in which we do research. So in itself, it's a decolonizing method. It allows us to give voice. It allows us to kind of put the spotlights on those who are marginalized, those who are forgotten. That's decolonizing. It allows us to give space to them and to their experiences. It allows us to almost put the power back in their own hands in the terms of telling these stories and narratives. So I would really hope that those in the HSRC who are interested would use these books as a platform and a way to kind of continue reading, learning, creating community. And the 3rd book, that's what I started off saying, the 3rd book that we've just written is about how to do poetic inquiry. And you recall you were part of the team that did these workshops around the country trying to train people, another batch of people in the method. And we need to do more of that because, as we found, there was something really, really powerful that happened in the room.
Yeah.
There was something about putting this method in people's hands. We could all feel in those spaces, oh my gosh, what's just happened? Something really powerful. A space in which people felt heard, a space in which they felt there was an escape from the academy and the ways in which they were forced to be as kind of academics. This space was open, wide open. It felt safe. It felt that they could use their voices and they could write their way into all of those experiences. So for me, I really, really hope that we continue it, and even as I leave, I will be involved with thinking about how can we keep this alive, how can we keep it going, because I really do believe in its power to transform, to make us better as human beings, and to shift things in the world, as lofty as that sounds.
Yeah, I think I've found that the methodology has really brought a lot of humanity back, especially for researchers and academics. We have started to relate to each other again and really understand and see, okay, we are all human, and acknowledging we all have experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
So what message would you like to leave us with at the HSRC? I hate saying that.
Just because you have to say the leaving word in that.
Yeah, I wish I could just leave it blank.
Okay.
Just a beep.
So I've been at the HSRC 20 years now, and it probably would be fair to say in those 20 years there have been lots of ups and downs. And I would say one of the ways it's allowed me to navigate the ups and downs has been a couple of things, and those are the words I want to leave people with. And the one is find the joy. Find the joy. You know, I think all work is tough, all work is hard. There are things in every work environment that are difficult. But equally, in that same space, there are puddles of joy. There are moments that you can create for yourself. So for me, the joy and the sustaining thing has been the work. It's given me such incredible joy to be able to do all the research I've done. So find the joy, find the thing that kind of makes you want to get up in the morning and come to work. So whether that joy is through the work, or whether that joy is through your people. So that's the second thing. Find the joy and find your people. Find the people who are like you, who are interested in similar things. It may not be in your division, it may be across the HSRC, which is even better. But find the people that are your team, so that when things are rough or things are difficult, there's a buffer. There's a sense in which this team will hold you and kind of help you navigate all of that. So yeah, find the joy, find your people.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. And yeah, I won't say goodbye. It's not goodbye yet, but thank you for this amazing conversation and all that you have contributed to the HSRC and to me as an individual.
Yeah.
So thank you. And thank you for watching, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you.
Listen to Mangkoko sande ulayana Otla golaneng mangkoko sande fatsatsi le tshaba Otla golaneng mangkoko sande Kyo wa bapala mangkoko sande Ki ngwana marena Ki o wa bapala mangkoko sane O tsamaya le dikgosi Ki ngwana madina leti ke mangkoko sane Moemeleng le semoshi Moemeleng le semoshi Moemeleng
When we were children, we swung on trees, hung on dreams, paid flowers visits, captured bees, unconscious investments, now life rather sweet. We caged birds just to be free. Wandering souls conquered mountains barefoot, chasing after rabbits, after bad habits, made innocent mistakes, and belts were never known for waste. We made Granny run, now her back bent like branches reaching out for the sun. Will she ever taste the sweetness of her fruits, the creativity of her juice, her wrinkles, history lines, and remembrance of our youth? We were young, naughty scenes in hiding, but when seen, hidings were a scene, and we ran like we carried freedom in our feet. When streets are playgrounds before playgrounds are built on our streets, tongues dressed in different speech, loneliness dared not to befriend us. Tea and laughter for breakfast, inhaled stories, now we own legends for breath. Rich with yesterdays, we inherit age, the past, the master, the future's a present slave. I wasn't flex then. If time is money, memories, an investment.
Buaka